ask members to take their seats quickly and quietly. Are there any questions without notice? And I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister and the Minister for Indigenous Affairs recently met with me, and I'm very grateful for that, to discuss the unprecedented and tragic levels of sexual abuse of children in Alice Springs and elsewhere in the Northern Territory. Government, please join with the opposition in supporting a Royal Commission into sexual abuse of Indigenous Australians.
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question, the Leader of the Opposition. I also thank him for the constructive engagement that we had in my office with the Minister for Indigenous Affairs about what is very serious issues. The Leader of the Opposition would be aware that in just last year, in fact, the National Strategy to Prevent and Respond to Child Sexual Abuse 2021-2030 was put in place by the former government. It was put in place with the support of state and territory governments and with the bipartisan support of what was then the opposition and is now the government. This is important because quite clearly when it comes to these issues we need to work cooperatively across Parliament, but across parliaments as well and different levels of government. And this work, of course, includes responding to the recommendations of the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. The National Office for Child Safety is leading work to protect all Australian children for child sexual abuse under the National Strategy to Prevent and Respond to Child Sexual Abuse for this decade. This was put in place by the Morrison government just last year, as a result of the evidence that was put forward, and I congratulate the former government in doing that. They had our support in doing it. The National Strategy includes measures led in partnership by the National Indigenous Australians Agency and First Nations experts to support and empower First Nations communities in the Northern Territory. Minister Burney was on the ground in Alice Springs recently, and Minister Burney might like to add to the answer about what she saw as well on the ground in those communities. But I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question.
I give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On the ground, just recently, I visited Alice Springs, not long after the Leader of the Opposition was there. I spoke to Territory families, I spoke to women's services, I spoke to youth services. In fact, I visited 2 youth services. Not one single person raised with me the issue of Royal Commissions into Aboriginal children and sexual assault. What they did raise with me was working in partnership with concrete actions to address this issue, which is unacceptable.
Before I call the member for Boothby, I'd like to inform the House that present in the Distinguished Visitors Gallery today is the Right Honourable Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the Minister of State, Indo-Pacific in the United Kingdom Government, and a great friend of the Parliament, Her Excellency Ms Vicky Trudell, the High Commissioner for the United Kingdom. A welcome to you both. And I give the call to the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Why is it important to the Albanese Labor government to deliver on its promises, especially the National Anti-Corruption Commission?
Good question. The member for Bowman is warned. When ministers are attending the dispatch box, they will be able to come to the dispatch box in silence. And I give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Boothby for her question. It was former Prime Minister Paul Keating who said, when you change the government, you change the country. On the 21st of May, the Australian people voted to change the government, and today the Australian Parliament has voted for a reform which will change the country. The Albanese Labor government was elected with a very, very clear mandate to deliver a National Anti-Corruption Commission with teeth and without delay. We said we would legislate this year, and today we did. That commitment has been honoured in full. The Commission will be able to investigate serious or systemic corruption across the entire federal public sector. The Commission will have the necessary powers to root out corruption when it occurs, and importantly, the Commission will be able to work to prevent corruption from happening in the first place. It will improve standards of transparency and integrity in this place. It will go a long way towards restoring the bond of trust between elected representatives and voters that have been so weakened in recent years. Today's passage of the National Anti-Corruption Commission bills demonstrate this parliament at its best. It stands in stark contrast to other behaviour this morning when those opposite failed to join the majority of this House in the censure of the former Prime Minister, the member for Cook, for his atrocious power grab.
Order.
I would also remind the House that it was those opposite who promised a National Anti-Corruption Commission in December 2018 and never delivered.
Give the call to the honourable member for Grey.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. I refer to the Minister's visit to Ceduna last Friday. Will the Minister confirm she witnessed firsthand the direct result of a government's policy to scrap the cashless debit card, which saw street brawls and a large number of intoxicated individuals arguing and fighting? Is this the tragic but predictable outcome for Ceduna because the government has scrapped the cashless debit card?
The call to the Minister for Social Services.
Oh, I'd like to thank the member for his question, and I was very pleased to visit Ceduna last Friday, where I was able to engage with a range of different organisations and services to talk to them about what they needed going forward, to make sure that they were supported and properly provided services. One thing I would say is that what was made very clear was that the council, when I met with the mayor and other services, they were very clear that they wanted a positive vision for Ceduna going forward. They wanted to make sure that I understood that there was a positive message in the town. So yes, I was able to also speak with the police, and the police made it very, very clear that they could not attribute antisocial behaviour that happens from time to time as a result of the reduction of the abolition of the card. In fact, I did want to pick out a little bit of misinformation where there's been a number of comments made and reports, anecdotal comments, because I understand, Mr Speaker, this is a very emotional issue. But we've got to deal with the facts when it comes to this issue. And that includes, in one site, there was reports of antisocial behaviour 2 days after royal assent of the increase of the number of people sleeping rough in a particular town. Now, of course, no changes had actually happened 2 days after royal assent. So that was absolutely inconsistent with actually the evidence.
The Minister will pause. I'll give the call to the member for Grey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My point of order is on relevance. We are 1 minute 45 seconds into this answer, and there's been no confirmation from the Minister.
Resume your seat. The Minister is being entirely irrelevant. Your question was about her visit to Ceduna. She's speaking about her visit to Ceduna. Order, and she's giving a detailed answer to your question. I'll give her the call.
Thank you, Speaker. And what I did speak with a number of organisations is what the support they need to address long-standing issues in the community, long-standing issues that have existed for some time. Now, I must say, and if the member actually got out to Ceduna a bit more often, he might understand.
Order.
that on that day,
Members on my left.
there was a funeral in town. There was a funeral in town,
Order.
and there were a
Member for Barker.
number of people that had come from outside the Ceduna area, indeed outside the 5 different communities surrounding. There were significantly high tensions and significantly some grief in the town. So it was a particularly a sad day in Ceduna and the surrounding communities for this significant sorry business. But what I would say is I was also very pleased to be in town to deliver a commitment of $17 million for economic development in the town. This was money that the former government announced and never delivered, and I was welcomed in that town because we are delivering money to those communities.
Order. There is far too much noise. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Fremantle. The member for O'Connor is warned. I just said I wanted silence in the House. He continually has interjected. If he does it one more time, he will leave the chamber. Give the call to the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What are the implications of today's inflation figures? How has the Albanese government acted to address the cost of living and stagnant wages?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Fremantle for his interest and for his question. Another fine member of the WA Massive asking another great question here in this House today. Mr Speaker, the Bureau of Stats monthly CPI indicator increased by 6.9% through the year to October. This was down from the 7.3% increase through the year to September, and it was below market expectations. It was a wide range, but the median expectation was 7.6%, and this result is well below that. In the data, we saw some pretty big falls in fruit and vegetable prices last month, but this doesn't yet reflect the impact of the flooding. And we're seeing the rate of price growth in new dwellings, which has been a big contributor to inflation to date, continue to fall. But there are good reasons to be very cautious, Mr Speaker, about the inflation numbers released today. It's important to remember that the monthly read is a relatively new data set. It doesn't include everything that the quarterly release does. And also, really importantly, this data doesn't yet fully include the price impacts of the recent floods or the impact from higher energy costs in recent months that are yet to fully show up in the reported figures. All things considered, Mr Speaker, this result is cautiously welcome. It shows us there are reasons to be carefully optimistic that we are getting near the inflationary peak, but we are not there yet. Inflation is still too high. It's still hurting households. It's still the #1 challenge facing our economy. And that's why responding to inflation was the #1 priority of our budget. It delivered cost of living relief with cheaper childcare and cheaper medicines, fee-free TAFE and affordable housing, but it didn't add to inflation. By keeping annual real spending growth to an average of 0.3% over the forward estimates, and by returning more than 90% of tax revenue upgrades to the budget as well. And the inflation challenge is just another reminder of the costs and consequences that have come from a decade of stagnant wages in our economy and in our country, which has left real wages lower today than they were a decade ago. And that's why we are working so hard, Mr Speaker, to get wages moving in this country again, because we know that wages growing strongly and sustainably is good for the economy, not bad for it. So, Mr Speaker, all of these actions in the past 6 months have been about cleaning up the mess that we inherited, but they've also been about making sure the budget is more responsible and our economy is more resilient. And we know, with this inflation challenge hanging around longer than we would like, that there is much more work to do, but that work has begun.
Give the call to the member for Kooyong.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, journalists obtaining and publishing sensitive information in the public interest is essential to democracy. Australian citizen Julian Assange is still detained in Belmarsh prison, charged by a foreign government with acts of journalism. Mr Assange's freedom will only come from political intervention. Will the government intervene to bring Mr Assange home?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Kooyong for her question, and she raises an issue that is of great interest to many Australians and of interest to people, it must be said as well, across this chamber. I particularly note the members for Bruce, the member for New England, for example, people who have raised this question. I some time ago made my point that enough is enough. It is time for this matter to be brought to a conclusion. In that, I don't express any personal sympathy with some of the actions of Mr Assange. I do say, though, that this issue has gone on for many years now, and when you look at the issue of Mr Assange and compare that with the person responsible for leaking the information, Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, she is now able to participate freely in US society. The government will continue to act in a diplomatic way, but can I assure the member for Kooyong that I have raised this personally with representatives of the United States government. My position is clear and has been made clear to the US administration that it is time that this matter be brought to a close. This is an Australian citizen. As I said, I don't have sympathy for Mr Assange's actions on a whole range of matters. But having said that, you have to reach a point whereby what is the point of this continuing, this legal action, which could be caught up now for many years into the future. So I will continue to advocate, as I did recently in meetings that I have held. I thank the member for her question and for her genuine interest in this, along with so many Australian citizens who have contacted me about this issue.
Before I call the member for Lyons, I'd like to inform the House that also in the gallery today is Mr Greg Warren, the member for Campbelltown in the New South Wales Parliament and the Shadow Minister for Local Government. Give the call to the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Local Government and Territories. How is local government being given a voice by the Albanese Labor government? How is it being heard?
The call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, and I thank the member for Lyons for his question. A man who has to work with 12 local government areas in his electorate. And as a former regional mayor, I know the importance of working with all levels of government to make sure that you can deliver the services your communities rely on. The local government sector is a trusted delivery partner for the federal government. They are the only level of government who deliver services to every town, village and every community across this country. As a government, we know how important the sector is, which is why we have brought local government back to the table of National Cabinet. We rely on councils to deliver services on behalf of the federal government, whether that's disaster recovery, whether it's aged care, whether it's closing the gap initiatives or other community services. If we're going to rely on them, we have to give them a seat at the table and listen to them. We are also bringing back the Australian Council of Local Government in 2023. 546 local government areas across this country, bringing them here to speak directly with the Prime Minister, with Cabinet Ministers, with Ministers and the government on how our priorities and their programs can be delivered best into communities. On top of that, this week I held the first Labor government ministers meeting, local government ministers meeting of the Albanese government. We discussed critical issues: local government sustainability, housing, critical shortages in skilled workforces and their own capability. We know local governments across Australia deserve broad sweeping policy that delivers and meets the needs of communities across this country, and we will ensure that their voices continue to be heard. Local government across the country will benefit from all of our policies, whether it's increased jobs in the renewable energy sector, access to secure housing, better connectivity, or helping them deliver their locally led solutions. We are continuing to provide financial support for local councils so that they can fix roads, upgrade facilities and provide essential services. Let's not forget, it was the Whitlam government that introduced financial assistance grants, $64 billion delivered into the sector since that time. And in 2022-23, this government is committed to delivering $2.9 billion in financial assistance grants to local governments across the country. We've also committed $750 million in local roads and community infrastructure, an increase of $250 million on what those opposite committed, because we know how important local roads are to our communities. We know this untied funding enables local governments to deliver their community priorities and enables the best place-based solutions to come through. I know firsthand how important funding is, and I've met with over 170 councils who reiterate that they want to work with a federal government that wants to help them deliver for their communities.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Barara.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Can the Minister advise whether, on her recent visit to Alice Springs, anyone raised with her concerns about an increase in child sexual and physical assault and violent crime?
I give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Child sexual abuse is abhorrent. Every single person in this chamber is of that view. No matter where you live, our children have a right to grow up safe and healthy. And let me assure this chamber, as a First Nations woman with decades of experience in education and child protection, I know the best way to protect children is to work with communities. I was the Minister for Community Services in the New South Wales Parliament. I saw the worst of what could happen to children when they were abused. I dealt with it on a daily basis. Years and years of experience. I am focused on concrete actions that make a difference. Establishing a Royal Commission does not mean concrete actions on the ground directly with local communities. Yes, I did go to Alice Springs. And in Alice Springs, as I said previously, I met with families, Northern Territory. I met with women's services. I met with children's services, and I met with youth services. And none of them raised with me a Royal Commission into Aboriginal sexual assault.
The Leader of the Opposition.
They are raised. The
Minister will pause.
There needs to be.
The Minister will pause a moment. The Leader of the Opposition does not need to yell to get his point across. The Minister is answering directly the question in detail. I'm requesting the House hear her in silence. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order. What is the point of order?
Point of order, Mr Speaker. It's relevant. So I want to pay tribute to the Minister for her service. But many of us, Mr Speaker, have dealt with those victims. And I have asked a reasonable question.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. The Leader of the Opposition, if he wishes to raise a point of order on relevance, is entitled to do so. He did not do so. You will not question the chair either. I give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
What was raised with me by the many people I spoke with who work in Alice Springs, who live in Alice Springs, and are dealing directly with this very serious issue is the need for coordination across 3 tiers of government. Coordination with local government, with schools, with police, and not punishing people. That's what was raised with me. That in Alice Springs there is leadership,
The member for Petrie.
there is capacity, and I have faith in the people of Alice Springs to know what their issues are and to be able to deal with them with the support and the constructive involvement of all tiers of government.
When the House comes to order, I'll give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, earlier today you gave a statement.
Order. The Minister for Infrastructure and the Leader of the Opposition will cease their discussion across the chamber. I want to hear the member for Lingiari in silence. I want to be clear with everyone. When members are asking questions, out of courtesy and respect, I want the chamber to listen to the question. Equally so, when a minister approaches the dispatch box, they're to be addressed with respect and courtesy as well. Now give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Earlier today you gave a statement on closing the gap. How will a voice to Parliament help to achieve the objectives of closing the gap? And what work has been done on the structure of the voice?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, and I thank the member for Lingiari for her question, and most importantly I thank her for her services for remote communities, in particular in the Northern Territory, in her now electorate, but also as a former minister in the Northern Territory government. She brings a great deal of experience and honour to this House. Mr Speaker, this morning I heard an extraordinary interview by another great Indigenous Australian, one who has been honoured in this House by being the first Indigenous Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Ken Wyatt, the former member of this House. And in that, Ken Wyatt addressed very directly the suggestion that somehow there was no detail when it came to the Voice for Parliament and the link between a Voice for Parliament and practical reconciliation in closing the gap, something that Ken Wyatt was very passionate about. In it, he said a range of things. Mr Wyatt spoke about there being 4 pages. He said this: if people read them, they would understand the detail. And it's pages 15 to 19, which spells out the principle-based approach, the scope, how it does work in practice and what are the steps we need to get there, and then the relationship with government which doesn't impinge on the sovereignty of the Australian Parliament. He was talking about this, the Indigenous Voice co-design process, the final report to the Australian Government of July 2021. He went on to say, now I took this report to Cabinet twice, not once, but twice. In it, he referred to the pages that outline the principles-based framework for local and regional voice, how does this work in practice, the national voice overview, the structures and principles which are there between pages 15 to 19, and I table those pages of the government report that was developed by, of course, Tom Calma and Marcia Langton. They were, of course, commissioned by the former government. It reported to the former government. It is 280 pages of detail. 280 pages of detail about how the voice will operate. And what's more is that it arose from the 2018 Joint Select Committee on Constitutional Recognition relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's final report, where there are clear recommendations in that report. It was a bipartisan report.
Order.
We have had this process for a long period of time. It's time we advance this project.
Give the call to the Honourable Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Today, the Minister for Industry was asked what would happen if states rejected Labor's half-baked plan on power prices. The minister could only say, "Let's wait and see." Asked for his message to Queensland, the minister could only say, "I love Queensland." When pushed for actual details, the minister said, "I was hoping you wouldn't ask for details." Given the government has no idea about the details,
the Deputy will just resume her seat. The Minister for Defence Industry has been continually interjecting on the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. I made it clear the question before. This will apply to both sides of the chamber. So, out of respect for the Deputy, I'm going to ask her to state a question again. I'll give her the call.
my question is to the Prime Minister. Today, the Minister for Industry was asked what would happen if states rejected Labor's half-baked plan on power prices. The minister could only say, "Let's wait and see."
The Attorney-General will not interrupt the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. She will start her question again and give her the call.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Today, the Minister for Industry was asked what would happen if states rejected Labor's half-baked plan on power prices. The minister could only say, "Let's wait and see." Asked for his message to Queensland, the minister could only say, "I love Queensland." When pushed for actual details, the minister said, "I was hoping you wouldn't ask for details." Given the government has no idea of the details, why won't the Prime Minister say sorry for giving false hope to Australians about lowering power prices?
The call. Order. Order. Members on my left, I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I really love Queensland.
I give the call to the Prime Minister. He'll be heard in time.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I think the member for her question, which is based upon a range of false premises, and I'll make the following comments. One is, I did hear the interview conducted by the Minister for Industry, and I thought he did very well. So congratulations. I thought also, and I want to make further comments. That's the first point that I'll make. Second point I'll make is I love Queensland too. And the third point I'll make is that the minister was quite right. So there's this thing called the Cabinet, and in the Cabinet, when you asked about what the Cabinet discussions were, it's appropriate for you to say something like, "I hope you weren't asking that question," because you don't reveal Cabinet discussions. I know that will seem bizarre for those opposite, who apparently it's okay to talk about who held what ministry when people are writing a book, but it's not okay to be accountable in terms of Cabinet government. So I encourage all of my Cabinet colleagues, when asked to reveal Cabinet discussions, to say exactly that. To say, "I'm not telling you," or "I hope I wasn't being asked that question," because we don't talk about Cabinet processes. The Cabinet is dealing with these issues. The Minister for Industry is diligently consulting with the manufacturing sector in particular.
The member for Fairfax will cease interjecting.
And he is doing.
The member for Fremantle. The member for Fremantle will cease interjecting, will be warned. The member for Fairfax is getting close to a warning, and I give the call to the Prime Minister, who will be heard in silence.
And he is doing a terrific job in that process. We'll continue to work through these issues. We have said that we will make some announcements before Christmas. There's a time frame that we have said for our announcements. We stand by it, and I thank the Minister for Industry on the work that he's doing as part of that process, and I congratulate him on a terrific interview. And I hope that people do continue to listen to PK between 7:30 and 8 o'clock, because the interview with the Minister for Industry was equalled, at least, with respect, by the rather extraordinary contribution of Ken Wyatt. So I encourage you to look at both transcripts.
Prime Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the member for Macon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How will the Albanese Labor government fix the failure of the former government to provide accurate, reliable and transparent information when it came to defence spending and key projects?
Give the call to the Minister for Defence and Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank the member for his question? Today, Mr Speaker, the parliament is focused on transparency. Although, to be honest, transparency ought to be a foundational ethic in all that we do on every day. The member for Cook's defence of his actions, that he would have told the truth if anyone had actually asked him, obviously treats every member of this House, and particularly his own colleagues, with complete contempt. But the idea—
The Minister for Defence will resume his seat, and I will hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
It was a question about defence. On the most charitable view of this question, he is well outside the scope of it, and he ought to be directed back to the—
I agree with the Manager. The question was about the member for Braddon and the member for Lindsay are not helping the situation, about defence spending on key projects in comparison to the previous government, and I give him the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But the idea that the failure of transparency in the former Liberal government was solely confined to the member for Cook would be completely wrong, because it was an abiding culture of all of them. It belonged to every one of them, and it most certainly applied in defence. Now, today we learn, through the ANAO's report onto Defence administration of the Integrated Investment Program under the former coalition government, that when those opposite were advised that the attack class submarine program would cost $78 billion, the number they provided to the public was $50 billion. The ANA report makes clear that when those opposite were advised that the Hunter-class frigate program would cost $36 billion, the number they provided to the public was $30 billion. Now, to be clear, that is not a failure of transparency. That is straight-out misinformation on a grand scale. That is the equivalent of trying to hide the entire state budget of Western Australia. And the reason they did this is because those opposite were unable to deal with the hard questions about those costs, because to do so would have been to actually engage in defence policy. And those opposite are never interested in doing that. They're just completely obsessed with the politics of defence. And it's this behaviour which has left our government inheriting 28 different programs running a combined 97 years over time. Mr Speaker, in our history, there has never been an administration, as in the former Liberal government, which treated Australia's defence with such contempt. Now, the Albanese government is different. We are introducing an independent program office. When programs go wrong, we are going to have objective criteria by which they are put on the projects of interest, projects of concern list. And then there will be monthly reports to ministers so we can get that back on track. But all of that pales into insignificance compared to the fact that we will be transparent with defence spending and the challenges which face our country, because we understand that it is transparency which drives value for money when it comes to defence spending in this country.
The Minister's time has concluded. Order. I'll give the call to the member for McPherson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. It is a privilege, not a right, to be welcomed as a guest to our country. In government, the Coalition cancelled more than 10,000 visas of dangerous non-citizens who posed a threat to the Australian community. Minister, how many visas have you cancelled under the character provisions of the Migration Act?
Order. Order. Members on my right, give the call. Order. The member for Cooper will cease interjecting. The member for McNamara, the member for Barker will leave the chamber under 94A. Give the call to the Minister.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the Shadow Minister for Home Affairs for her question. As she would be well aware, on this side of the House, when we were in opposition, we supported the 2014 changes to the character cancellation regime.
The member for Latrobe is warned.
As the member for Latrobe should remember, because he was in this place, we supported in 2014 the changes introduced by the former government to the character cancellation regime. We believe it is important that we cancel visas where appropriate. We deny visas and cancel visas as appropriate. We also think that this is an area where a common-sense approach is required, because we have seen unintended consequences of the regime that was put in place by the former government. We've been working through those, having regard in particular to the critical importance of our relationship with our good friends in New Zealand. These are issues that should be of significance to the Leader of the Opposition, who put a wrecking ball through the immigration portfolio when he was Minister. He built an edifice around himself instead of focusing on the national interest, particularly on questions like this, which should be beyond this cheap partisan politics. Because after all this time,
the Minister will resume his seat. We'll just pause, and I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition. We'll cease injecting so I can hear from the member for Macpherson.
Point of order is on relevance. The question clearly requires a number, and we are a minute and a half into the answer, and we haven't received the number.
I thank the member for Macpherson. Order. Members on my right. The member for Paterson is warned. I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, the preamble clearly made every part of this answer relevant to the question that was asked.
When a specific question is asked, and we've had this before with yes or no or a specific number, the Minister needs to be relevant to the question. I'll ask him to return to the question to make sure that he is addressing the member for Macpherson's concerns, and I'll give him the call.
Thank you, Speaker. I am sure, like all Ministers for Immigration, and indeed Ministers for Home Affairs, who also have responsibilities in this area, as the Shadow Minister will know, make these decisions on the basis of the law and the materials before me. What is so disappointing here is that everyone in this parliament recognises the policy grounds we have that go to visa grants and indeed to the cancellation of visas to non-citizens who should not be in the community, who present a range of risks. These are not issues that should be shamelessly politicised. Indeed, many issues, Mr Speaker, that go to the operation of our migration system go to the shameless politicisation of this regime by members opposite over 9 years of neglect. And I actually expected a bit more of the Shadow Minister for Home Affairs, because one thing that unites or should unite every member of this place is a concern for the safety of the Australian community. The
member for Petrie.
And the fact that members opposite seem entirely unconcerned about this is frankly disappointing. From the last election, they have learned absolutely nothing. Perhaps they could consider how we could work together in the national interest on these questions instead of engaging in this shameless scaremongering.
Order. And the House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to tackle the teacher shortage crisis it inherited?
Give the call to the Minister for Education.
Can I thank the member for Canberra for her question? There aren't many jobs that are more important than being a teacher, and we don't have enough of them. Not enough Australians becoming teachers and too many teachers leaving. And this is a problem that's been building now for 10 years. In the last 10 years, there's been a 16% drop in the number of young people enrolling in teaching. There's also been a drop in people completing teaching degrees, and as a result it means we don't have enough new teachers. But on top of that, a lot are leaving. Think about this for a second. 30 to 50% of teachers leave the profession in the first 5 years. A lot of really experienced teachers are leaving too, not retiring, just resigning. There's no one reason for this, but one of it's workload. The idea that teachers rock up at 9 o'clock and knock off at 3 o'clock isn't right. The Productivity Commission released a report a couple of months ago that made the point that Australian teachers work longer hours than teachers overseas, but they spend less time in face-to-face teaching than their international counterparts. The report showed that only 40% of the hours Australian teachers work is face-to-face teaching. Now, fixing this will take time. Fixing this requires the Commonwealth Government and state and territory governments to work together, and that's what we're doing. Last month we released a draft National Teacher Workforce Plan, and it sets out the things the Commonwealth Government will do, the things that state and territory governments will do, and most importantly the things that we can do working together. It includes $328 million in extra federal funding for things including $159 million to train more teachers, $56 million on scholarships, up to $40,000 apiece to encourage our best and brightest to become teachers, and a $25 million workload reduction fund to trial new ways to give teachers more time to teach. And on top of that, a proposal for a national campaign to help raise the status of teaching, to recognise the important work they do. So the draft is out there. We're seeking feedback from teachers and principals and the general community about what's right, what's wrong, what needs to change, what should we put in the plan that's not there. Ministers will meet in a couple of weeks to consider that feedback and finalise the plan. Paul Keating said a good education is like the keys to the kingdom. It's like a master key that opens every door. And if that's right, I think it is, then our teachers are the key masters. We need more of them. We need to keep the ones that we've got. And that's why this work is so important.
Give the call to the member for Goldstein.
To the Health Minister, eating disorders among young people have skyrocketed during COVID, with clinics seeing demand increase by up to 85%. Minister, mothers in Goldstein are pleading with me to do something before their children literally die of starvation due to lack of available care. I ask you, when will the government step in to help the states provide cohesive, one-stop mental and physical care for these children and young adults?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for her question and for her deep interest and engagement already, along with a number of other colleagues on the crossbench on this issue. We've already met twice, I think, about this issue. I know also you've had a consultation with the Deputy Chief Medical Officer and Chief Psychiatrist of the Commonwealth, Professor Ruth Vine, and are engaging with the state government down in Victoria as well. You're right, eating disorders are a devastating range of mental health conditions. As the member knows, as I think all members in this House know, they tend to strike in adolescence and in young adulthood. An incredibly promising, exciting time of life, but also a very, very vulnerable time. They're devastating for the individual and they're incredibly distressing, as the member has pointed out in her question, for those who love patients with an eating disorder, those who love them and are caring for them. They're difficult to treat and they're very, very dangerous, with the highest mortality rate of any single mental health condition. And the member is right, COVID has driven a very big increase in cases, with no evidence yet that that spike is starting to recover. Even before COVID, we knew that most people with eating disorders were not receiving a proper diagnosis, and about 80% are not receiving evidence-based treatment. Now, to his credit, the former Minister, Greg Hunt, put in place Medicare services to provide up to 40 psychology sessions and 20 dietitian sessions for people with eating disorders. In just 3 years of that availability, tens of thousands of patients have received almost 5 million sessions of care under that program. Right now, we have $20 million in grants out to tender to provide better community-based supports for people with eating disorders. And the Commonwealth, as the member knows, has funded all states to build new residential treatment services for eating disorders. As the member knows, the Victorian Centre is being constructed in Armidale as part of the Alfred Health Service, and the sooner they can be completed and the sooner they can be opened, obviously the better. But the member is right. We need more targeted services that get to people when and where they need them, rather than seeing people cycle through hospital emergency departments. We need to keep working with the National Eating Disorders Collaboration to...
The Minister will pause, and I'll just take a point of order from the member for Goldstein.
Speaker, on relevance to the Minister, the question was, when will the government step in?
Call to the Minister.
As I say, we need to keep working with the collaboration also to find better ways to prevent people developing eating disorders in the first place. As the member knows, these drivers are complex and they have deep roots in our culture. They are issues of body image, advertising norms, the role of social media and much more. I thank the member for her advocacy. We need to engage more between the Commonwealth and the states. I think I've outlined the way in which, to their credit, the former government did that. We've got much more to do, and I look forward to working with the member over coming months.
With a call to the member for McEwen.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the talented Minister for Industry and Science. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to rebuild Australia's manufacturing capability after a decade of neglect?
I give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Do that. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'm happy to inform the member for McEwen and the whole House we'll be taking a big step forward today in strengthening Australian manufacturing when we introduce the National Reconstruction Fund Corporation Bill, a key election commitment, because we believe in the value of Australian ideas and the value of know-how to get things done. These are great ideas leading to great firms and great jobs in our cities and our regions, and it's a bedrock belief of the government that Australia must be a country that makes things. Modern economies need to possess sharp manufacturing capabilities across medicine, across energy, value-adding critical technology. And the other thing is that we have the ability to be able to get this done, because I've seen in businesses, and we saw through the pandemic, their ability to be able to pivot, to be able to scale up manufacturing when needed. And I'm reminded of a visit into the member for Lilley's electorate, seeing 888 Engineering, and I was visiting the member for Lilley's electorate because, as you all know, I love Queensland. You may have heard that. May have heard that. And they moved quickly. They normally work on supercars, and they delivered an engineering result that saw them manufacture ventilators when we needed them most. Well done to them. We need to tap into that spirit for the long-term good, but we've got a big task ahead of us because we are dead last on the OECD list of countries in their manufacturing capability, but it's time to get up off the mat. And the $15 billion that we'll provide through the National Reconstruction Fund will help. It will be the greatest investment in industrial and manufacturing capability in living memory. A huge thing, a huge thing. And the bill will set out the framework for the fund, an independent board guided by an investment mandate targeting key priority areas. And again, I need to emphasise for the House, this will be an independent board making their decisions, not a colour-coded spreadsheet in sight. It will be decisions made on the basis of the national interest, not political interest. We won't be standing at this dispatch box daring large manufacturers to leave the country. Instead, we'll be backing them to grow jobs, and that's what this is all about. We need to be able to grow jobs and recognising too, as most of the members in this place realise from the regions, manufacturing is a big job creator. It creates full-time, stable work. We need to do more of that. The National Reconstruction Fund is the platform for those manufacturers to think globally, build locally. So we will get this done.
The minister's time has expired. Give the call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer. I refer the Minister to reports today in the Financial Review that former ACCC Chair Rod Sims said multi-employer bargaining raises issues for competition and consumers. Can the Minister guarantee that consumers won't pay higher prices as a result of the government's extreme industrial relation changes.
Give the call to the Assistant Treasurer.
And I thank the member for Hume for his question. What I can guarantee, and what every member of the Albanese Labor government can guarantee, is that we stand for higher wages. That we stand for workers having a fair go and being able to negotiate on an equal basis with employers and to be able to get wages moving again. This is in stark contrast to the policies of those on the other side of the House, because for 9 years—
The member for Hume has asked his question.
Because for 9 long years on their watch, we saw wages stagnate. And for households which are struggling with cost of living increases, there are 2 ways to deal with this, and one of them is to ensure that we can get wages moving again. And we've heard time and time again from employers in the childcare sector, in the aged care sector and in other caring sectors across the economy that they cannot attract workers. And one of the reasons they cannot attract workers is because the wages aren't able to compete with other comparable jobs across the economy. So what we on this side of the House can confirm, is that our policies—
will pause. The minister is being relevant to the question and specifically is talking about employment bargaining. So I will hear from the Shadow Treasurer on a point of order.
On relevance, Mr Speaker. Consumers just want to know if they're going to pay more.
Consumers are workers too, by the way.
I call the Leader of the House. Order.
Mr Speaker, I just refer to your earlier rulings about abuse of points of order. When you have a situation where a minister is clearly already being relevant and abuses like that continue, I'd simply ask it to be taken into account in future.
Order. I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, on the point of order, Mr Speaker, the question was about consumer prices, asked of a minister who has responsibility for consumer protection, and we've had not one mention of consumers and prices consumers will pay.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat for a moment. There are 2 parts to the question, and one was clearly about multi-employee bargaining and industrial relations. Just because you don't like the answer does not mean you can jump up and take a point of order on relevance. If the minister was not being relevant, I would bring him back to the question. Just want to make it clear, I will hear points of order always, but they need to make sure that they are the correct points of order. Just going to ask the Assistant Minister to return to the question. I'll give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I'll tell you one lot of price increases. That they don't want us to talk about. That's the 40% increase in childcare costs that occurred on their watch. There's one set of price increases that they don't want to talk about. We have already implemented policies which are going to address the 40% increase in childcare costs that they were very happy to see occur on their watch. One of the first priorities that we addressed when coming into government was to ensure that households could make a choice of whether they wanted to go back to work 3 days, 4 days or 5 days a week, because we are addressing the price increases in childcare by ensuring that the majority of Australian households can afford to pay for childcare. Now, I can understand that the Leader of the House got a bit jumpy when I was talking about negotiations, and we are concerned to ensure that low-paid workers are able to access a bargaining stream which enables them to negotiate fairly. You can understand why the Leader of the Opposition is very jumpy whenever we talk about negotiations, because the last negotiation he was involved in didn't go so well. He was able to provide $27 million worth of taxpayer money for a block of land only worth $3 million in Leppington. So whenever we talk about negotiations, he gets very jumpy over there because the last negotiation he was involved in...
concluded. He will resume his seat. I give the call to the order. The House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Tangney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. What progress has the Albanese Labor government made in the Home Affairs portfolio in its first 6 months? Thank you.
I give the call to the Minister for Home Affairs and Cyber Security.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. Speaker, the final act of the previous government was their decision on the 21st of May to sabotage protocols that protect Operation Sovereign Borders for their own political gain. And the parliament will remember that the former Prime Minister directed the former Home Affairs Minister.
The Home Affairs Minister will take a brief
21
pause.
seconds, Speaker.
We'll just pause for a moment. In 19 seconds in, I will hear from the Manager Opposition Business.
Standing orders are very clear. Imputations of improper motives to a member are highly disorderly. And within seconds, that's what this minister has done. She's got a bad record of pointing the finger at others.
Resume your seat.
But she needs to comply.
I'm going to ask the Minister to begin her answer again and to refer to the question. I give her the call.
Thank you so much, Speaker. And they don't like it much when we talk about this subject, do they? For very good reason. And I'm actually referring to facts that were found in a report that was provided to me in July of 2022 that demonstrated that the former Prime Minister directed the former Home Affairs Minister, who's getting quite vocal over there, to order a senior military officer to issue a public statement about a live military-led operation in which young Australians in uniform were at risk. She didn't do it herself. She asked a public servant to do it for her. The report that was released to me about this incident... He's already had his go. He's already had his go, Speaker.
The Minister will pause. I'll ask the Manager of Opposition to state the point of order, otherwise I will sit him down pretty quickly.
This point of order is on relevance. The question was about the progress the Albanese Labor government has made. It wasn't
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Order. The members on my right will cease interjecting so I can hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, to the point of order, as the Minister's been making clear, in those first 6 months there was a report that she received, which she is now describing.
The member for McPherson will cease interjecting. Before the Minister resumes, the question was The question was about progress in the past 6 months. The Minister is being entirely relevant, and I do not want her interrupted for the remainder of her time. I'll give her the call.
I know, sometimes the facts hurt, Speaker. It found in this report that the Minister and her office had interfered inappropriately with the work of the public service and demonstrated that the former government put their political interests above the national interest, and this is an approach that I see right across the Home Affairs portfolio. Speaker, the House will remember that one of the first actions of the former member for Cook on becoming Prime Minister was to abolish the Cyber Security Ministry. Well, haven't the chickens come home to roost on that one? Australia has just experienced its two worst ever cyber attacks within 3 weeks of one another.
Members on my left will
the Australian government, in the last 6 months...
The member for Moncrieff is warned. The Minister will continue and be heard in silence.
There is no question that in the last 6 months
The
the new
Manager of
Australian
Opposition
government...
Business is warned.
There is no question that in the last 6 months the new Australian government has done more to protect the cyber security of Australians than the previous government did in the whole preceding 6 years. Now, Speaker, this has included creating...
The member for Wannon is warned. The
Again,
Minister will be
Speaker.
heard in silence. Give her the call.
It's not a history I'd be proud of either.
This has included creating an incident response function which did not exist before we came to office. It's involved fixing privacy laws and the rollout of a new model of policing which will see the Australian government hack the hackers. And there is a lot more work to be done. There will be more cyber attacks, but we are punching back for the first time in this critical area of policy. Speaker, on immigration, when we arrived in office, there were 1 million unprocessed visas sitting in the system, no plan to process them, in the middle of the biggest labour shortage we have had in 70 years. And I want to pay credit to the Minister for Immigration for the work he has done. Now, I could go on, Speaker. Failed citizenship laws that left a legal and constitutional mess, an immigration policy framework totally failing to meet the nation's needs, an immigration system being exploited by criminals. For every rock I look under, there is a legal and policy mess created by the former government, and we are cleaning it up.
The member for McPherson. The member for McPherson, if she continues to interject, will be warned. So I can hear from the member for Wentworth.
Thank you. My question is to the Workplace Relations Minister. Senator Pocock has said that you made a commitment to him to review modern awards. Can you please confirm that you have made this commitment and provide further information to the chamber, particularly regarding to the form of the review, its timing and whether it will be conducted independently of government?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Wentworth for the question, and also acknowledge both the member for Wentworth and a number of members of the crossbench in this House raised issues here that have ended up being part of the negotiation that's taken place in the Senate. And the review of the awards is one of the issues that had been raised by crossbenchers within this House as well. The review is something where final decisions of government as to its mechanism haven't been taken yet, but it is my intention that the review would commence next year. The reason for the review, and one of the reasons why I readily agreed to it, is as part of the Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill, we're not only updating the objects of the Act, we're also updating the objects of the modern awards. So that means that the award system will now have objects that it didn't have when it was developed. So, for example, the principles of gender equality, particularly under the amendments that were made here, they'll now be requirements of the Act, but they weren't requirements when the awards were developed. And similarly for Secure Jobs. Secure Jobs is now an objective, or once the legislation is passed, will be an objective of the awards, but wasn't when they were designed. Now, certainly I'm not proposing that the review would be limited to these issues, and certainly there'll be a decision of government as to the full breadth of it. But when you change the objects of the award system, I think it's very important that you then have some sort of review to work out what that actually means for the awards themselves.
Give the call to the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is also to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How will the Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill get wages moving again, and is this consistent with the commentary? Thank you.
Give a call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Pearce both for her question and for her commitment to getting wages moving. There is some commentary I want to refer to, but it's commentary that agrees that the bill will get wages moving. And it's commentary that came from the Leader of the Opposition, and I thank him for it. Because it was the Leader of the Opposition who said, and I quote, "It's going to result in higher wages." Similar comments were made by the Shadow Treasurer, but because they were said on television, he doesn't like me quoting them. But the principle there from the Leader of the Opposition was made very clear, and I quote, "It's going to result in higher wages." And that commentary is spot on. When you include gender equality as an objective in the Fair Work Act, then you look at some of the awards that are dealing very much with feminised industries, then you're looking at an area where it will get wages moving. The Leader of the Opposition is right. When you give the Fair Work Commission the power to consider equal remuneration and work value cases in a much more effective way, and you make it easier to run an equal pay case, that will get wages moving. The Leader of the Opposition is right. Giving the Fair Work Commission the expertise to determine pay equity claims. The panels that we're setting up both on pay equity and on the care and community sector, will improve the expertise on these issues that is there within the Fair Work Commission. That will result in higher wages. The Leader of the Opposition is right, and I thank him again for his commentary. Banning pay secrecy clauses will help get wages moving. Pay secrecy clauses have been used as a way to make sure that people don't know what each other is earning. It's a way of putting downward pressure on wages. Getting rid of those pay secrecy clauses will allow people to better know what the going rate at their workplace is. That will result in higher wages. The Leader of the Opposition is right, and I thank him for his commentary. Sunsetting of the... I hear the objection. What about privacy? If you don't want to tell people what you're earning, you don't have to. You don't have to. The problem at the moment is we have people who want to tell people what they're earning, and they're not allowed to. So before you interject as to what you're angry about with the bill, read it. Read it. Just have a look, because it's the opposite of what the interjection's saying. Sunsetting zombie agreements, agreements which date back to the work choices era, where people are now being paid less than the award. Getting rid of those will get wages moving. The commentary from the Leader of the Opposition is right. Introducing multi-employer bargaining will get wages moving. The Leader of the Opposition is right. But on all these issues where he's right, for those opposite, the fact that he's right causes them to reach the opposite conclusion. If it gets wages moving, they don't want it to happen. If it gets wages moving, the government's in support.
Call to the Prime Minister.
Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper and thank the number of points of order for the reason why you didn't get more questions.